Greetings everyone in love, light, and wisdom. Welcome back to my channel, and this is Mirrors of Reality. I picked this book, Moonchild by Aleister Crowley, because I had an intuitive hunch that the media and the way that he's portrayed is not quite exactly the way that he believed. This book was written in 1917, and when we go to the source of the man, we actually get an understanding of who he really was. One of the things that we must know about authors is that when you read their books, you're actually getting a glimpse of their own thinking process and their minds, because they are creating something. And as J.R.R. Tolkien said, he is a sub-creator, and so when he writes his stories, we are getting a glimpse into his spirit, his soul, his certain particular frequency. So when you read Aleister Crowley's books, instead of just going to one source on the internet and seeing his quotes, and thinking that he was one of the most wickedest evil men in the world, as many say, you actually find out that he's a lot more different than people might have imagined. And so I always had a feeling that he was not totally evil, as many people have portrayed him to be. And so there is definitely some truth inside of these books that Aleister Crowley leaves for us. This book is pretty much a memoir. It's a way that he views magic, the way that he has done magic, and the different types of rituals that he did. One of the things that Aleister Crowley is known for is his sexual magic. Is a sex magic, which is rituals that you do when you are trying to conceive. And so this story centers around the idea of conceiving a child, bringing a child into the world that is so pure and comes from the energies of the moon in order to change the world. And it's a beautiful idea for those who resonate with the moon, feel connected to the moon, and this is your chance to shine. When you read this book, you will see why. So I want to discuss this book openly because this is something that I feel that we need to talk about, and there are many spiritual truths inside. I put the butterfly video in order to show that Crowley, like me, was stumbling upon a type of truth that exists within the universe. When you really reflect within, and this is what mystics often do, they discover the truth about the spiritual nature of things, such as the idea that everything in the universe is white light. Crowley's quotes about black magic is showing his opinion and understanding of the greater truth of the universe that exists, that when you do something dark or harmful towards others, you will get it back to you because it is not the will of the entire universe. The collective consciousness is always seeking to grow and seeking to learn and seeking for life. So anything that acts out against it will be a lesson for that person that acted out against another. And that is what black magic does. It returns what you do to others right back to you in a much harsher way, as Crowley said in his quotes. And he says it a lot in this book. So I'm going to begin, and I'm going to read you just a very brief synopsis of the story, because this is a complicated book. So if you don't know kind of the synopsis right away, it's hard to grasp what I'm talking about, because I'm not going to read the entire book to you. But I will read the synopsis to you so you get an understanding of what it's about. A year or so before the beginning of World War I, a young woman named Lisa La Gouffia is seduced by a white magician, Cyril Gray, and persuaded into helping him in a magical battle with a black magician and his Black Lodge. Gray is attempting to raise the level of his force by impregnating the girl with the soul of an ethereal being, the Moonchild. To achieve this, she will have to be kept in a secluded environment, and many preparatory magical rituals will be carried out. The black magician Douglas is bent on destroying Gray's plan. However, Gray's ultimate motives may not be what they appear. The Moonchild rituals are carried out in southern Italy, but the occult organizations are based in Paris and England. Okay, so that's the synopsis that you read. And just an interesting personal note, I was watching Twin Peaks because I've never seen the show and I heard all about it. It was one of my mother's favorite show. So I started watching it over the summer and I finished it, and it definitely was pretty amazing. I really enjoyed it a lot. One of the things that is a theme in that show is the White Lodge and the Black Lodge. So when I was doing some more research about Twin Peaks, because I like to look deeper into things, so I went on the internet and I was reading, and somebody posted that the Black Lodge and the White Lodge idea actually came from Aleister Crowley in his book Moonchild. And that led me to actually buying the book Moonchild, because I've always resonated with the moon energies. But I wanted to read what Crowley was talking about with the Black Lodge and White Lodge, because that is always very interesting to me. I am somebody that doesn't see just black or white in terms of magic, but I see things as in the gray, in the idea that magic is neutral and it depends on the person's moment in time in their consciousness and in their intentions of what they do with their magic. So black and white magic is not something that's completely black or white to me, but that it lies somewhere in the hands of individuals who use the magic. And so I never really judge those who do either the dark arts or the light arts, but the idea is that Crowley did. He judged them actually very harshly, and he really mocked and ridiculed them. And I have a suspicion that those that try to slander his reputation are those that do practice the dark arts in this world. And so because he is somebody that talks about the black magic rituals and so harshly about those sorcerers and black magicians that do dark arts, then it's something that I think that a lot of people would like to keep down. And so they make him out to be the black magician. So it's very interesting once you read Moonchild and you read inside of Aleister Crowley's mind. The other thing is, I think that he is somebody that is pinned by those that are very traditionally religious. I will give a warning that this book will offend those that are very strict tradition Christians, because he often takes the devil advocate's point of view, and there's a lot of anger towards religion, but he really is somebody that studied the Eastern religions. He actually is not against Jesus at all. He is very much somebody that believes in the pure spirit of the Father and the Holy Spirit and the light, but he does not like the way that the church interpreted it for people and made them feel guilty and sinful and things like that. So that is where Aleister Crowley is coming from when he talks about religion, and oftentimes he talks about saying that he is going to take the symbol of the beast. He is the man of 666 because he is upset about what happened in religion. It's very much aligned to the way that the Illuminati see religion and those other secret societies. He is from the Order of the Dawn, which is a hermetic type of mysticism and occult society. And so all of those are going to be against traditional, literal Christianity, not mystical, spiritual Christianity. Not someone like J.R.R. Tolkien, in which he could see beyond labels and not judge others for having other faiths and other paths to get to a oneness, a union with God, which is what mysticism is really all about and what it teaches. So now that I got that out of the way, I just want to read you this here from somebody that wrote about him in a biography, and I thought that this was a really great quote. To comprehend Crowley, one must comprehend what he meant by magic, the discredited tradition he swore to rehabilitate. Magic, for Crowley, is a way of life that takes in every facet of life. The keys to attainment within the magical tradition lie in the proper training of the human psyche itself, more specifically in the development of the powers of will and imagination. The training of the will, which Crowley so stressed, thus placing himself squarely within that tradition, is the focusing of one's energy, one's essential being. The imagination provides, as it were, the target for this focus by its capacity to ardently envision, and hence bring into magical being, possibilities, and states beyond those of consensual reality. The will and imagination must work synergistically, for the will, unilluminated by imagination, become a barren tool of earthly pursuits, and the imagination, ungoverned by a striving will, lapses into idle dreams and stupor. By Lawrence Sutton, in his book Do What Thou Wilt, A Life of Aleister Crowley. So, let's begin, and maybe you will come to your own conclusions whether you believe that he was a black magician or somebody that was a little bit different than what the media has portrayed. I'm going to begin with how he started out the book with a prologue. This is his note. This book was written in 1917, during such leisure as my efforts to bring America into the war on our side allowed me. Hence my allusions on the subject, and the sad showing of Simon If at the end. Need I add that, as the book itself demonstrates beyond all doubt, all persons and incidents are purely the figment of a disordered imagination? ? And this is London, 1929. That's when he wrote that note, but he started writing it in 1917. So the book is very interesting, where you meet a woman named Lisa LaGrafia, and she is this wonderful figure, kind of this ingenue and innocent woman, and she meets a man named Cyril Gray, and he says that he wants to bring her into an order, and he starts teaching her about ideas of energy and magic, and she eventually feels kind of seduced by him, and she feels she loves him, so she decides to go into this order. And what ends up happening, as many secret societies as they do, they bring you through a sort of dying process where you're spiritually losing your ego and you're dying in a symbolic way, and then they bring you into a new rebirth. It's very actually connected to Christianity with actually baptism. But secret societies will do it in a way that's very theatrical, and oftentimes they will go through a process that kind of symbolizes actually dying. And so she goes through this process. And what's amazing about it is that the way he writes, you have to understand him as an individual, and I'm starting to get who he was. He has this mischievous side. He was very much like a fairy in that idea. And he had this mischievous side where he would try to get as dark as he could, as kind of sinister scene as he could, and then he would just turn everything around. And he would show you that actually he's of the light. And so that's kind of what happens to Lisa. Cyril Gray actually scares her, and the order type of initiation that she goes through is a scary process. And she's almost fleeing for her life, but instead she decides to stay for love. There's an opportunity for her to leave the order, and she decides to stay for love. And what ends up happening is that they accept her because they realize her loyalty to this order is so profound that she is somebody that they would like to have as a member. And also, they are also seeking out for a vessel, a womb that would be something so pure to bring in a pure spirit into the world. So this is where it starts, where he talks to her about this process and what they want her for. Man, said they, is merely a fertilized ovum properly incubated. Hereditary is there even at first, of course, but in a feeble degree. Anyhow, they could arrange any desired environment from the beginning, if they could only manage to nourish the embryo in some artificial way. Incubate it, in fact, as is done with chickens today. Furthermore, and this is the crucial point, they thought that by performing this experiment in a specially prepared place, a place protected magically against all incompatible forces, and by invoking into that place some one force which they desired, some tremendously powerful being, an angel or archangel, and they had conjurations which they thought capable of doing this, that they would be able to cause the incarnation of beings of infinite knowledge and power. who would be able to bring the whole world into light and truth. So that's how they kind of tell her what they want her for. And after a while, she starts to agree because she's moved by love, but she's also moved by this quest to bring in light and truth and beauty into the world. And so what ends up happening is that as she's initiated into the order, she's starting to be taught the secrets about perception and energy and the way that the senses work, and how you can see beings that are of a negative energy that want to harm humans and those that are helpful. So then Lisa's brought into this beautiful environment, and here's how he describes it. A touch of frost was in the air, and Cyril led Lisa within. A special set of rooms had been prepared for their reception, but Lisa was displeased to find that they had been arranged entirely with reference to feminine tastes and requirements. A single scheme of color embraced the whole suite, white, blue, and silver. The tapestries, the carpets, the very ceilings were wholly in these and no other lights. The pictures and statues were of Artemis, no other goddess. The very objects in the apartment were crescent-shaped, and the only metal in evidence was silver. Where the crescent could not serve the purpose, the surfaces had been engraved with stars of 9 points. Only 3 books lay upon the table. They were the Endymion of Keats, the Atalanta in Calydon of Swinburne, and one other. But in a small bookshelf were several other volumes, and Lisa found later that each one described, suggested, or had more or less directly inspired by the moon. In a silver censer, too, burnt an incense whose predominantly ingredient was camphor. Everything present was designed or chosen so that it might turn the girl's mind to the Earth's satellite, the moon. Subsequently, she discovered that this plan extended even to her diet. She was to live exclusively on those foods which wise men of old classified as lunar in nature, on account either of their inherent qualities or because they are traditionally sacred to Diana, the other name for Artemis. After beginning of the experiment, no male was to enter the apartment. She was a little frightened in grasping the fact that Cyril must have foreseen her perfect compliance from the beginning. He noticed it with a slow smile and began to explain to her why he had chosen the moon as the type of butterfly they were going to snare. And he calls souls butterflies. And so there's the butterfly net that they are constructing. And a butterfly net is one in which you are conscious and aware of the energy of the child that you want to bring into the world. And so putting the room in the Artemis and the moon glow and all these things is going to kind of incubate her womb with these energies of the moon. And so that is the hope. And so that's what sex magic is when you are using sexual practices to bring in some kind of energy into the world, whether it be actually creating a child or whether it just be in the act of sex itself. And that's something that Aleister Crowley was really known for. And he was also very much talked about with his practices. Now, none of us were really there, and so we can't really tell what really happened. But a lot of times the media will talk badly about these practices. But as you see, there's something else going on in his mind, that he is going deeper into the purpose of these sexual rituals, that it's actually to facilitate a being of higher consciousness and certain types of energies to come into the world to help the world and assist it. And that's a reality of what a lot of people do in this world when it comes to rituals and especially sex magic. I think Justin Timberlake made a song, Sexual Magic. So they end up picking Lisa because she is a Cancer. And so they felt that she was the perfect womb for this, and she had the energy of the moon herself. And so they started to kind of incubate her in the apartment. She was not allowed to see the man that she was falling in love with that was going to create a child with her until they actually did a ritual. And the ritual was actually to symbolize her as being Artemis and him being Pan, and coming together in one night and creating this child, this Moonchild that they are wanting to create. One of the things that I wanted to read to you about the idea of black magic, and Aleister Crowley did not just mock or ridicule black magicians or the idea of black magic, but he saw it as something weaker of nature to the power of love. And that is a very strong theme in this book, and that's really what touched me about this book. Here I'm going to read this part here. The defect is inherent in all black magic, because that art is itself a thing set up against the universal will. If it were not negligibly small, it would destroy the universe, just as the bomb-throwing anarchist would succeed in destroying society if he amounted to, say, a third of the population. Now, Simple Simon, at this time, did not know Douglas for the enemy general, but he was in the closest possible magical touch with him, for he had absorbed the thing in the garden into himself, and that thing had been a part of Douglas. Douglas is the black magician that is trying to stop the process of this Moonchild to come in. And so he keeps sending these dark energies and entities towards the White Lodge that is trying to bring in this child. And what ends up happening is this wonderful thing here. So he set himself to the complete assimilation of that thing. He made certain that it should be part of himself forever. His method of doing this was as simple as usual. He went over the universe in his mind and set himself to reconcile all contradictions in a higher unity, beginning with such gross things as the colors of the spectrum, which are only partialities of white light. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning with the idea of the butterfly. I was showing you the science behind this idea. He resolved everything that came into his mind until he reached some abstractions as matter and motion, being and form, and by this process worked himself up into a state of mind which was capable of grasping those sublime ideas which unite even these ultimate antinomies. That was all. Douglas, still in magical touch with that watcher, could feel it being slowly digested, so to say, by some other magician. The term watcher is actually used in here, and now we get an understanding of what watcher means. A watcher is an entity that a black or a white magician conjures up to watch the other side, to keep an eye on them. It's like a scout, like a spy. So Douglas, the black magician, sent a watcher, and it was this thing in the garden, which was like a dark kind of shadowy energy. And what ends up happening is this. Douglas, still in his magical touch with that watcher, could feel it being slowly digested, so to say, by some other magician. This, incidentally, is the final fate of all black magicians, to be torn piecemeal for lack of the love which grows by giving itself to the beloved, again and again, until its I is continuous with existence itself. Whoso loveth his life shall lose it, is a corresponding scriptural phrase. So Douglas, who might at that moment have saved himself by resignation, was too blind to see the way, an acquired blindness resulting from repeated acts whose essence was the denial of the unity of himself with the rest of the universe. And so he fought desperately against the assimilation of his watcher. It's mine, not yours, he raged, to the steady and continuous affirmation of true unity in all diversity which Simon If was making. He opposed the affirmation of duality. The result was that his whole mind was aflame with the passion of contrasting things, of playing forces off against each other, and when it came to practical decisions, he divided his forces and deliberately created jealousy and hatred, where cooperation and loyalty should have been the first and last consideration. Yet Simon If had used no spell but love. So there you have it. Love, what was really the power that dissolved the thing in the garden. And there's a point where it describes that Simon walks towards this thing and he actually absorbs it with his love. And it just becomes part of him because he connected to the unity of the universe. And when you connect to the unity of the universe, there is no more duality. You see everything for white light. There is no darkness any longer. And that's really the secret of mysticism and those that practice the light arts instead of the dark arts. They are stronger with the force of love behind them. The black magic is only temporary and doesn't prove to be as strong results as the light magic does. So Simon If is basically the old man that is teaching Lisa before they start the incubation process. And Cyril Gray is the one that she's in love with. One of the things that I find very interesting about this book is there are several real names in it. He talks about Madame Blavatsky. He talks about a woman named Diana Vaughan, who was also a occultist. So there's a lot of name drops in here of real people. And that's why I think that it's more of a memoir of his experiences, and it's closer to a reality that actually transpired rather than just a figment of his imagination. And that's why he puts that little note with like a question mark at the end, because I don't think that this is actually all imagined. I think that a lot of this actually did happen, that they really did try to bring about this child into the world. And I will give a message to Crowley in the spirit of unity. There is not just one Moonchild, but that the Moonchild is an idea of a child that can come into the world that is very in touch and in tune with the emotions. The moon is what rules the emotions because it rises the level of water within our bodies. And so the moon has always been connected to the emotional side of us. So the idea that a Moonchild could come into the world and be a light and a truth in the world, in a world that sometimes is not always in touch with emotions or tries to repress them, or just individuals have a hard time expressing them. And there's an emotional truth about war. War is not done through the wisdom of emotions, but rather a place of ego and power and a position of greed and lower consciousness. And so a child that they wanted to come in was going to be highly emotional and one that could speak the truth and could help stop the wars. And that was really kind of the whole goal. And here is where Crowley is someone that's connected to the fairy energy. And if you have done your research on him, you'll know that he's connected to the fairies. And oftentimes, some of the beings that he communicates with, and I think that he revered the fairies. I think that he really, truly honored them, and he felt connected to them. And he writes about the fairies connecting to the energy of Artemis of the moon. And here's this wonderful part here. Of the spreading of the butterfly net, with a delectable discourse concerning divers orders of being, and of the state of the Lady Eliel and her desires, and of the second vision that she had in waking. One of the things that happens is that when Lisa becomes more and more in touch with the moon energies, as they're doing these rituals, as she has all these maidens helping her dress, and she's constantly wearing blue, silver, and these flowing types of robes, and they made a beautiful canoe type bed, and she actually slept on the actual balcony looking out to the moon in this private area, which they had the White Lodge going on. And you get an idea that the White Lodge moves around, that they find places that are safe from other people watching them, but there's never just one stationary White Lodge. That's the idea that you get in the book. So they picked this wonderful place in Italy, and so there's this gorgeous veranda that she's out on, and it's overlooking a villa. And here it says, "A great peace brooded on the villa. Daily the sun gathered strength, and the west wind told the flowers that a little bird had whispered to him that the spring was coming. The results of the magical invocations began to peep through the veil of matter, like earthly crocuses. The atmosphere of house and gardens was languid and romantic, so that a stranger could not have failed to feel it. Yet With this was a timid, yet vigorous purity, a concentration of the longing of the magicians. The physical signs were equally unmistakable. By night a faint blue luminosity radiated from the whole enclosure, visible to the natural eye. And to one seated in the garden, darting scintillations, star sparkles would appear, flitting from flower to flower, or tree to stone, if he kept as still and sensitive as one should in such a garden, and on the rightly tuned and tempered ear might fall, now and again, vague snatches of some far-off music. Then there were some pallid perfumes in the air, like suggestions of things cool and voluptuous and chaste and delicate and lazy, of those soft tropical loves which satisfy themselves with dreams. All these phenomena were of a peculiar quality. It will be well to recite the fact and to suggest an explanation. These sights and sounds are conveyed clearly enough, but they disappear the moment the full attention is turned upon them. They will not bear inspection, and the fact have been used by shallow thinkers as an argument against their reality. It is a foolish point to take, as will now be proved. The range of our senses is extremely limited. Our sensorial apparatus only works properly with reference to a very few of very many things. Every child knows how narrow is the spectrum, how confined the range of musical tone. He has not yet been drilled properly to an understanding of what this may mean, and he has not been told with equal emphasis meaning many similar facts relating to other forms of perception. In particular, he has not learned the meaning of diluted impression, in spite of an admirable story called The New Accelerator by Mr. H.G. Wells. Our vision of things depends upon their speed. For instance, a four-bladed electric fan in motion appears as a diaphanous and shining film. Again, one may see the wheels of automobiles moving backwards in a cinematograph, and at certain distances a report of a cannon may be heard before the order to fire is given. Physics is packed with such paradoxes. Now we know of living things whose time world is quite different to ours, only touching it over a short common section. Thus a fly lives in a world which moves so fast that he cannot perceive motion in anything with a speed of less than about a yard a second, so that a man may put his hand upon it if he can restrain the impulse to slap. To this fly, then, the whirling fan would look quite different. He would be able to distinguish the four blades. We have thus direct evidence that there are real, material beings whose senses are on a different range to ours. That's how he views fairies, and he views any type of unseen beings, is that we just have not elevated our senses yet to perceive them. I talk about it a lot in my video, just intuitively I understand that when you want to connect to fairies and see them, you have to be at their vibration. You have to be able to speed up your vibration to catch a glimpse of them. And that's what it's about, is rising to the vibrations of the fairies where you can actually see them and enjoy them and notice them. Now, there may be times in human history where a fairy has slowed down their vibration enough for a human to see them, for the experience of the human perceiving them at that time. It is all about their personal soul journey and the contract between the fairy and the human. But that's basically why people cannot see fairies. And as Crowley says, that's not a reason of the evidence against their absence. It just means that we have yet to discover them because our senses have not yet attuned to those higher frequencies. So he talks a lot about energy in this book. If you are mystical, if you love metaphysics, if you love to learn about energy, Crowley had a lot of great wisdom that he shared in a style that was like an adventure, but really it was a teaching tool. And that's what I noticed about this book, is that it seems like a memoir, and it's him as a mystic trying to teach humanity all the things that he have learned and he has remembered about the senses and the mystical experiences of life. There's also a really beautiful body positive message in this book about Lisa, who turns into Alil as the moon energies come into her life. And Aleel is the name that they chose for her, which is so beautiful. And something I find very interesting is that J.R.R. Tolkien's Elvish word for moon is Asil. So Eleel, Asil, it's an interesting connection. But here's what it says about Eleel when she starts to get more and more into the moon energies. So far as Aleel was concerned, the result of the operation was almost too evident, meaning the types of invocations, and this was after the conceiving of the child. Simon If might have thought that things were being overdone, for she had become extremely fat. Her skin was of a white and heavy pallor. Her eyes were almost closed by their perpetual droop. Her habit of life had become infinitely sensuous and languid. When she rose from recumbency, she lolled rather than walked. Her lassitude was such that she hardly cared to feed herself, yet she managed to consume 5 or 6 times our normal dietary. She seemed always half asleep. A cradle shaped like a canoe had been arranged for her on the terrace of the moon, and most of her waking hours were spent there, drinking milk and munching creams flavored with angelica. Her soul seemed utterly attracted to the moon. She held out her body to it like an offering. I think that was so beautiful as an image to show that type of energy of the moon, the over-emotional, the highly feminine, the receptive type of energy, it just made her slow down and become a little bit heavier, but still very beautiful. And I thought that that was a really wonderful image to present. So she's going through all of this, and you could see the changes happening. Now, while those changes are occurring in her, and she's getting more of the moon energy in her, she's starting to see visions of Artemis. She's starting to see these, all the different types of spiritual beings that are connected to Artemis. She gets spiritual messages and visions and dreams. Crowley has a very descriptive way of speaking about the mystical experience. And he said this before in a quote, that it's very hard to talk about the mystical experience in words. But I think he does a very good job, and those who really like that type of language will really enjoy this book a lot. And here's more type of evidence that he was really against anything that was of black magic or of wicked nature. He says this: "The wicked fall into the pit that they have digged," said Simon If. "All this applies to the question of magic." So once again, he's saying that there's a physical law that is against the idea of the universal will of the universe, that when you do harm unto others, you will get it back to you. And that is just the nature of things, because it is the truth. It is the truth of you coming forward to show you who you really are. One of the themes that he talks about that I thought really mirrored reality is there's something that happens after she does conceive this child and the butterfly is caught. What ends up happening is she has too much moon energy in her now. So she's entirely emotional. No logic to her, and she doesn't really use a type of reason with her. So then she ends up, the White Lodge basically disbands, and then she ends up getting really emotional, and she starts to kind of go to an unhealthy spectrum of her emotions where she becomes paranoid and she questions herself and she doubts everything that happened. And then it allows the Black Lodge to have an advantage over the White Lodge, because she has now been the target of the Black Lodge, and now the child is the target of the Black Lodge. And because she's now emotional and she's not really concerned about the well-being of the child that she conceived, but more about herself, because she's an unhealthy, very emotional being, not a balanced being with logic and reason. And that's what Crowley was trying to say, and that's very true. When we are all emotional, that can be a problem at times, because we do need that balance of reason and the logic to come in to help us, so that we're not always angry with others and just, she has tempers and she's completely suspicious and she's just depressed and she's angry all the time, and Yeah, it's very interesting to read the imbalanced part of Valil that happens after the rituals because of all the moon energy within her, and she's not worked to balance it. So the Black Lodge keeps on fighting, and here once again he says something very important here. The laws of force take no account of human prejudices about good or evil. If one is run over by a railway engine, it matters nothing, physically, whether one is trying to commit suicide or to save a child. The difference in the result lies wholly on a superior plane, meaning a plane that we cannot see, the spiritual plane. So some of the things may seem like they don't matter here on earth, but then when you get to the spiritual plane, that's where the consequences actually lie. That's where the karma comes from, is on the spiritual plane. And really it's the universe showing a mirror to you, looking at yourself and what you have decided to do. It is one mark of the short-sightedness of the sorcerer that he is content with his own sorceries, and if he should think that he can escape the operations of that superior law which does take account of spiritual and moral causes, he is the greater fool. Douglas, the black magician, might indeed wipe his enemy off of the planet, but only with the result of fortifying the immortal and divine self which was within his victim, so that he would return with added power and wisdom. That is such a powerful statement, that when someone attacks you with not even just black magic, but in any way, it strengthens the person that was attacked, adding more power and wisdom to the innocent soul that is attacked. And that is an amazing reflection of real life. That is exactly what ends up happening. The more you attack someone, the more they become stronger. And if their intentions are pure and they have not tried to harm others, and they're just the innocent one in this type of fight or battle, the universe, the entire universe will be on their side. And you see that in so many stories. I mean, J.R.R Tolkien knew this, and he had that idea that the whole Valar, the Ainur, Eru Ilúvatar, was actually on the side of the elves, hobbits, and men that were fighting against the orcs and Sauron. He also tells us a little bit about demons, where the danger is with demons. Occasionally, such beings, such as demons, find people ignorant and foolish enough to offer themselves deliberately to obsession by sitting in a dark room without magical protection and inviting any wandering ghost or demon to take hold of them and use their bodies and minds. True souls would never seek so ignoble a means of manifesting in earth life. Their ways are holy and in accord with nature. So there you have it. He was also against the seancing and the spiritualism that was going on at that time, where people would evoke demons and spirits into their bodies. And he would say that's foolish. Why are you giving that entity your body to take over and to control? So there you have also more evidence of his feelings. I'm going to read you a part about the Black Lodge, which there's a side of Crowley. He has a nice balance of dark and light. He understands the darkness as much as he knows the light. So some of the ways that he describes the Black Lodge is it's ugly, it's brutal, and it's disgusting, and it's bloody, because they use often blood sacrifices to invoke these demons and these watchers for them. So here is this part where he says, Douglas, the black magician who's in charge of the Black Lodge, he's doing this type of ritual, and he's calling on Hecate, but he's calling on her in a way that he perceives her to be evil. And in many cases, Hecate is actually known to actually be a protector. And so he's calling on her, and he's trying to get her to invoke the darkness, and he's calling to use her name. And what ends up happening is he ends up sacrifice his wife. And so here's what happens. Miss Douglas, her face subtly drawn and white, lifted her head with infinite effort towards her husband. I've always loved you, she whispered, and I love you now as I die. Her head dropped with a dull crack upon the slab. No one can say if she heard the reply of Douglas. "You sow, you ruined the whole show." For she had uttered the supreme name of love, in love, and the spell dissolved more swiftly than a dream. There was no Hecate, no sorcerer even. For the moment, nothing but two murderers and the corpse of a martyr between them. That's a very powerful moment. In this ritual of black magic, he's sacrificing his wife, and she says, "I love you." And it just completely dissolved the entire thing. He has no more power. There is no power greater in the universe than love. That's what Crowley believes. That's what I believe. I have come to know that. I think many people are awakening to that as well. So eventually, now what's interesting, and he keeps you going, is that you want to know what the child is like. You want to know what the Moonchild is like and what she looks like and what are her mannerisms. But the book draws you to the end, and you don't really meet the child at all. You get a little tiny description of her, which I will read to you, and then you can enjoy it on your own time when you read it too. So Elil, or Lisa, now it goes back to her name Elisa because the ritual is done. Now she's herself and she's very much human and not some kind of moon goddess as she was starting to become. And she then has her child, and here's what it says. The next day, no sooner had they landed at Barcelona than Lisa became suddenly and terribly ill. After a week, the doctors decided upon a radical remedy operation. The next day, a girl child entered the world, very much alive despite the irregular way of her entrance. No ordinary child either. She was a beautifully made baby with deep blue eyes, and she was born with 4 teeth and with hair 6 inches long, so fair as to be silvery white. Like a tattoo mark just over the heart was a faint blue crescent. I thought that was a beautiful description of the baby. Very interesting that the child was born with 4 teeth and hair that was 6 inches long already, showing that the child was wiser beyond their years. So if a child is born with 4 teeth already, the child, what Crowley was trying to say is that the child they brought in was an old soul. And so I took a vote, and this is a spoiler alert here because I'm going to read the ending. I took a vote on my Facebook page who would want to hear the ending because I thought that this was such beautiful spiritual truth that needed to be discussed in public, and many people are not going to read this Moonchild book. But if they happen to stumble upon this video because they're curious, at least they'll have this spiritual knowledge and kind of affirmation within them about something maybe they have discovered for themselves. So I'm going to read this here because it made me cry. It was such a beautiful ending, and I wanted to share it with others. So what ends up happening is, of course, Douglas, the black magician, gets what was coming to him. By doing all these black magic rituals and trying to stop the White Lodge, here's what ends up happening. Cyril Gray, the one that Lisa was in love with, other things started happening and she didn't end up being with him. So I'll read you this point here. This is Cyril Gray, the lover of Lisa, the one who helped conceive the Moonchild. And then chill caught him as he came suddenly upon a dreadful sight. Before him on the road stood a signpost, the lance of a Spahi, thrust into the bank of a ditch. Nailed to it the one word, Espion. A fatal curiosity drew him to the spot. As he approached, the wild dogs that were fighting around the sinister signal fled in terror from their ghastly meal. A sword had been thrust through the belly of the corpse. The tongue had been torn out, and one could recognize at a glance the work of Algerian troops. Men who had lost a third of their effective through the treacheries of the German spies. But despite all mutilation, he recognized more than that. He recognized the carcass. The carrion had once been Douglas. Cyril Gray did a strange thing. A thing he had not done for many years. He broke into a strong sobbing. I know now, he muttered, that Simon If is right. The way of the Tao. I must follow that harder path, the path where he who would advance draws back. So he's now seen his enemy from the Black Lodge lying there dead. And it makes him cry. It moves him to tears. And this is what ends up happening. At the banquet, he found himself an officer of the Legion of Honor. But his brilliancy and buoyancy were gone. He dined in dull decorum, his thoughts still turned to the shameful corpse in the ditch by the wayside. He excused himself early and left the Elysee. At the gate stood an automobile, and in it sat Lisa. She jumped out and caught him by the shoulders. She poured out the tale of her madness, and its result, and its cure, her careful tracking of his movements, her determination to recover him at any cost. He listened in silence, the silence of incurable sadness, and he shook his head. "Have you no word for me?" she cried, impetuously, torn by her agony. "Have you no gift for me?" he answered. She understood. "Oh, you are human, you are human!" she cried. "I do not know what I am," he answered. "Yesterday I saw the end of the game, for one." He told her in a few words of the horror on the roadside. "Go," he said. "Go to America. Find the child of the moon. There may or there may not be other task for us to do. I know not. Time will show." I will, she cried. "I will go now, quickly. Kiss me first." Once again the tears gathered in the magician's eyes. He understood more deeply than he ever done the sorrow of the universe. He saw how utterly incompatible are all our human ideals with the laws of life. He took her slowly and gently in his arms, and he kissed her. But Lisa did not respond. She understood this was not the man whom she had loved. This was a man that she had never known, one whom she dared not love, a man set apart, an idea to adore. She knew herself unworthy, and she withdrew herself. "I go," she said, "to seek the Moonchild. Hail and farewell! Hail and farewell!" The girl mounted unsteadily into her car. Cyril Gray, his head bowed upon his breast, plunged into the wooded pleasaunce of the Champs-Élysées. An ineffable weariness came upon him as he walked. He wondered dully if he were going to be ill. He came up against the obelisk in the Place de la Concorde with a shock of surprise. He had not noticed that he had left the trees. The obelisk decided him. Its shape smote into his soul the meaning of the mysteries of Egyptian magic. It was as invigorating as a cool plunge. The profess house of the order had been converted into a hospital, but who should come to greet him if not Sister Cybele? Beside her stood the 7th figure of Simon If. There were 2 others in the background. Cyril was not surprised to see his old master, the Mahathira Pang, but the other, it was Abdul Bey. "Come forward and shake hands," cried Simon If. "I have not been inactive, Cyril," added the old man. "I have had my eye on our young friend for a long time. I put my hand on him at the right moment. I showed him that spying was a dog's game, with a dog's death at the end of it. He has renounced his errors, and he is now a probationer of our holy order." The young men greeted each other, the Turk stammering out an appeal for pardon, the other laughing off his embarrassment. "But you are ill, Cyril," cried Sister Cybele, and in truth the boy could hardly stand. "Action and reaction are equal and opposite," explained Simon If, cheerily. "You will sleep, Brother Cyril, and you will then pass 7 days in meditation in one of the high trances. I will see to the extension of your leave." "There is a meditation," said Cyril firmly, "given by the Buddha, a meditation upon a corpse, torn by wild beasts. I will take that." Simon If agreed without comprehending. He did not know that Cyril Gray had understood that the corpse of Douglas was his own, that the perception of the identity of himself with all other living things had come to him, and raised him to a great adeptship. But there was one to comprehend the nature of that initiation. As Cyril walked, leaning on the arm of Sister Cybele, to the room appointed for his prescribed solitude, he beheld a great light. It shone serenely from the eyes of the Mahathira Pang. I looked up the name. Mahathira is a title given to Buddhist monks. So it ended up being his teacher that showed him the truth and the nature of the idea that the black magician that Cyril Gray was fighting was connected to him, and that all things in the universe are connected. And that's something, if you can keep in the back of your mind, it can always help you. Crowley leaves kind of a mystery left in the book. The idea that the Moonchild is something special, and now it's in America, and she understands now the mission in a greater sense of awareness, because she had to go through her things and realize things about herself. Now, I want to leave you off with an idea of the Neverending Story, and the child empress name is Moonchild. You learn that at the end. She says, "Say my name, Sebastian," and it's Moonchild. And I always thought that was a curious name when I was younger, but I loved it. But now I know it's not just some kind of hippie name coming from the 60s. I believe that this director was inspired by this book, and that this is a superior being that helps Sebastian gain his own power. So just keep that in mind when you watch this movie. Now you know where it came from. Everything is connected in this world. Always remember that. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get the book yourself. And I hope that it showed Aleister Crowley in a different light. One that maybe you can research further and read his books and try to understand the man coming from a more mystical perspective of truly who he was, rather than just reading the headlines about him or what the media wrote about him. Because, like the book says, there are battles of dark and light, but one of the things we must always remember, and a way to defeat and get rid of those battles and those wars, is by learning of our connection to one another and our unity to each other. And I know that within all of us is the Moonchild energy. In some ways it can be related to the divine feminine. But I believe that it's not about trying to overcome the sun energy or the divine masculine energy, but rather to rise to an equal level, to allow those that reflect the glow of the light of the sun now to come into their own. And this is a time of great equality for women and for those that are an introverted nature and those who have more of a shyer nature. I think that those souls are coming into their power to rise to the same level of the ones that have always been in the sunlight. So, Hen and Lei for watching, and I hope I'll see you on the next video.